Hey kids, howdy and welcome once again to Conscious Embodiment, Astrology and Dreams with Dr. Michael Lennox. We are in eclipse season, kids. We're in it. We are in the wormhole. The eclipse hit actually just after midnight today, Monday. So Sunday, Monday thing. We talked about it at the end of last week's episode, and I promised to talk about it again at the beginning of this. But before we dive into the eclipse that we are fully in, I want to do another shout out to my class that's starting on Saturday, Finding Your Voice. It's a fabulous self-investigation, kind of a shadow work class, only specifically focused on hindrances and limitations to having a strong, powerful voice out there in the world. If you want to spend the transformative wormhole in a process, releasing a more powerful use of your own voice, check out Finding Your Voice at michaellennox.com. All right, I got a question from Nancy this past week that I wanted to speak into today. So Nancy writes, "Hi, Michael. I am only a few months into getting your daily astrology readings. I appreciate the wisdom they bring. I may not consciously understand it all on a deep level. I do." Oh, I love that she said that because I think that's a thing. "I also appreciate the weekly ones you share for free. So many others can begin to understand the planet and how they affect their lives. I myself am only beginning to glean the intricacies of it all. My biggest question is about being born when Mercury was retrograde and if that impacts us differently." And of course, it's a great week to talk about that because Mercury is, in fact, in his shadow and doing something important this week.
Perfect, yeah.
20 years ago now, before I had any understanding of astrology, I was in a craniosacral class and we were doing rebirthing. Ooh, yes, I've had that experience many times. The one thing I came out of that was just how angry I was at being born when Mercury was retrograde. 20 years later, I'm still trying to understand the implications. Thanks again for all you do and all you share. Wishing you the best, Nancy. So, yes, Mercury is in his shadow period this week, and one of the things we're going to talk about is a conjunction between Mercury and Chiron in the middle of the week that we really need to pay attention to. So, one of the funny things about Mercury retrograde in the natal chart is that one of the sort of benefits of that is Mercury retrograde processes and cycles are less bumpy for the person who was born into the experience of Mercury retrograde in your birth chart. Now, outside of that, I get why Nancy's feeling a little angry because there are challenges to anybody who has Mercury retrograde in their birth chart. There's going to be some inhibition of communication. Now, that's a very generalized sort of language, and I can't really go any deeper than that because it's going to be different for every individual based on who they are, random and chaotic aspects of being alive and in a body, what sign Mercury was in, and therefore what house in your natal chart. Like there's all sorts of permutations, but the general idea that we're always going to look at with Mercury retrograde is what's the challenge in the communication style. And then part of the life becomes, working with that challenge. I love the irony of this question and my class on Saturday, Finding Your Voice. I did not plan the question to match the astrology, to match my class schedule. So, but, that's the power of synchronicity. These things all sort of landed on today's episode because that's just the magic of consciousness unfolding. So, I can see that there'd be some bother to it, but it's also, one of those things you can't argue with. You can't argue with where the planets were when you were born. You can't argue with the body, and the body we are in was shaped and formed by the moment we took our first breath. So I'm assuming that if you have a powerful experience, Nancy, where you get in touch with the rage at having this be part of your experience, that then also might lead you to coming to the other side of like letting go of that rage and seeing the benefits that you experience by having a more internally sort of placed voice. And then there's a thing called progressions in astrology where you can have Mercury retrograde in your birth chart and it can move direct at some point during your life, and that changes how you experience your communication. At any rate, Nancy, I get it. I understand. And my wish for you is that you find some acceptance and you get clear about what the gifts of having Mercury retrograde are for you, because they're in there. So yeah, kids, we're in it. Like the eclipse was exact at 12:01 a.m. today, really making it very much a 2-day experience of Sunday, yesterday, and today, Monday. Sun's in Aries, so we are in consideration of our sort of self, our I am consciousness, the desire to connect with knowing who you are and leading with that. Then in Libra is where we learn how to let that self-focus go and go into the we consciousness or the mirror consciousness, where there isn't just I am in the room, but the we are. So if the conscious awareness is in the I am piece, the Aries, the I know who I am and I'm moving powerfully forward, then what we're releasing in a full moon in Libra is anything that inhibits that powerful thrust forward. So codependency is a relational issue that Libra might reflect as a shadow. If Aries wants to be fired up and moving, one of the challenges of Libra in that dynamic is passivity, an unwillingness to move unless you can guarantee that peace will be the result of actions taken. I sometimes will use the language of the transcendent third to help sort of understand the archetypal message in a lunation. So if Aries is the I am and Libra is the we are, then the transcendent third around that is about the cooperation that happens when we are both aware of what the self needs and what others desire. Any Aries Libra opposition, whether it's a full moon or an eclipse, it's a relationship dynamic. Aries is the self, Libra is other, and they refer to the first and seventh chart in the natural zodiacal wheel, where the first house is self and seventh house is the house of relationships. If nothing else, one thing to sort of think about in this eclipse season is letting go of anything that inhibits you from having more beautiful relationship experiences. That's, of course, going to be different for every human being in a body, but that's one of the big essences of this eclipse season, is this relational dynamic. What do I have to let go of with regard to what my relationship expectations are, so that I can be more powerfully connected to my own journey, my Aries sense of that journey.
Michael, with this eclipse and the few days of feeling that, like hopping into that, would you meditate on this ideology or just be aware of how it's coming into your life?
Yeah, I would. That's a great question. How about meditating on like what needs to be released in order for me to have an experience of relating to others that feels loving and uplifting?
Got it.
This is all very healing, these two lunar cycles, both the one that we're in and the one that's generated by the next eclipse, which is a new moon kicking off a rather intense lunar cycle. That's all about healing, because that new moon, that's a total eclipse on April 8th, has the sun, moon, and Chiron, the great healer, all exactly at 19 degrees of Aries. So if the next lunar cycle promises a fast and furious sort of forward trajectory thrust, which the new moon in Aries always is, because remember, Aries is the first sign of the zodiac. When the sun moves into Aries and we are at the equinox, it's the new moon in Aries that's the real astrological year ahead intention setting moment. And if that moment in April is all caught up with our healing journey by being conjunct Chiron, then you can sure bet that this full moon is designed to rip some of those deeper wounds out from where they are so that we can move forward more sort of healed and integrated. So do not be surprised if, as part of this lunar cycle, many of your relationship dynamics are changing. And if that's the case for you, that's how I would contextualize this full moon in Libra, in exactly the way you kind of suggested. What should we marinate on in or ruminate on? It's like, what about how I move out into the world is in the way of me having more powerful sense of both me and others in harmonious relationship, all relationships, not just romantic, and just get ready to drop and release and let go of the things that are in your deep psyche that are ready to be let go of at this time in order for you to have more powerful and satisfying relationship dynamics, including with the one with yourself as you look into the mirror and attempt to say, I love you. So, outside of the fact that we are now fully in a wormhole experience where 2 weeks from now till the full moon in early April, we're just in fast moving energy, a lot of psychic, mental, emotional intensity, the kind of stuff that happens every time we move through eclipses. This week happens to be really, really quiet. So it gets kicked off with this outrageous full moon that's a partial lunar eclipse. And then there's nothing big for the entire rest of the week.
Huh.
So I'm going to give you a little general overview just to sort of, give a snapshot of the week. Well, sun's in Aries still, of course. We've got then our conscious awareness is in mind of beginnings and getting started, the joys of spring for those of us in the Northern Hemisphere. And if you live in a place where you get to have spring, like I know that spring is sprung when my fern on my dining room table sort of explodes in the spring. But, living in Los Angeles, we don't have much of a spring. But the Aries energy for the Northern Hemisphere is very much about the explosion and the fire of movement that we feel at this time of year. Apologies to those down under. You are a colonized area of the planet that was never meant to have Western astrology guide it because the seasons are different down there. Anyway, sun in Aries, we're on fire. Mars just moved into Pisces last week, so we've still got that for this week, of course, and all month. Action, choices, decision-making is steeped in the deepest waters of, the Piscean archetype. The benefit there is we can feel connected at an embodied level to the guidance that we tap into when we meditate and pray and use practice to deepen our experience. Challenge of Mars in Pisces is while he's not specifically debilitated here, it's still, deep, deep water. Mars, prefers action. He'll be much happier when he moves into Aries, at the end of April. Venus is in Pisces. She's delighted to be here. It's an exalted place for her. That's the astrological demarcation, exaltation from the Babylonians. So she loves it here. All that forgiveness and compassion is readily available when the planet of love and our emotional body is connected to the sign that invented things like forgiveness and compassion. But the real big news that I want to talk about is Mercury being in Aries. So indeed, Mercury is in his retrograde shadow. That means that he is moving over territory where he's designed to trigger everything that's going to come up in the backward motion. So I like to call the retrograde shadow the brochure of the process, because we're being set up with all the information we need to have in order to make the backward motion portion more valuable. Mercury retrogrades are outrageously important. Everything about how we experience life is about our perceptions. How you see the world is how you experience your life. Change your mind, change your life. That is the message here in a lot of spiritual sort of traditions that are modern. Talk about that if you want to change the experience you're having, you got to start at the level of your mind, your thoughts,
Right.
and your perceptions. Every time Mercury goes retrograde, we get to turn within, go into the unconscious, and have some processes that allow us to be more open, clear from the neck up. Now, they're bumpy as fuck because they're awkward. The guiding mechanism is no longer looking forward, but turned within. That's why it gets such a bad rap. But the importance of them cannot be underestimated. And so, with the retrograde shadow, we're collecting data that will help us when Mercury goes retrograde on April 1st. Now, I don't remember what I say in this podcast week to week, but I'm pretty sure that I forgot to talk about something really important that happened last week. So I'm going to beg your indulgence that, if I did talk about this last week, forget my, memory. But I really think that I didn't, and I need you guys to just hearken back to the equinox, because one of the transits that happened on the 20th, Wednesday of last week, that accompanied the equinox was Mercury and Chiron conjuncting. That's mind and perceptions getting together with the wounded healer, the great healer, however you want to refer to Chiron. I sometimes like to call Chiron Yoda because he's the part of us that knows how to use the force, right?
Yeah.
So, everybody readily knows who Yoda was. So like that. So what's crazy about this Mercury retrograde cycle, and I do think I mentioned this last week, but I just don't think I gave you the date of it because it was last Wednesday. This is the only triple transit of this Mercury retrograde period cycle. Like, that's crazy. I don't know that I've ever seen that in 30 years. Usually the spread of the planetary setup allows Mercury, who's going to move a good 12, 13 degrees in every retrograde. Like in this one, he starts at like 15 Aries, moves to 27 Aries, and back again. That's it. So there just don't happen to be anything in the cosmos at those degree points for Mercury to make a direct hit with, except Chiron. They're both in Aries. Chiron in Aries means we're in a decade where we're burning through wound. It's a fiery sign for the healing planet to be in.
I love that.
Right? Oh, and all wounded perception is a function of Mercury at some level.
Uh-huh.
Even if there's psychic injury or emotional traumas that we might ascribe to like Mars and Venus or Pluto and blah, blah, blah. Everything about how we experience our pain and suffering is a Mercury thing because perception dictates everything. So glance back to last week, kids, especially on Wednesday. What were you thinking about, talking about, or marinating in that looks anything like a healing kind of conversation? Because there's your theme for the whole retrograde cycle in April. Last week showed you what you're going to be processing at a deeper level next month. So it's a quiet week. There's not quite as much to talk about. So it's going to be a little shorter of an episode. I'll just wrap up with what I like to do every week in the Venus overview department. Since you know that I've been sort of obsessed with Venus, and I keep saying this over and over again, between the retrograde in Leo and then the last eclipse season where both lunations were ruled by Venus, we're now in a wormhole eclipse led by a full moon in Libra, which is also ruled by Venus. So Venus is everywhere for the last like year and a half and the year up ahead. And so I've been talking about what Venus is doing every week on the podcast, which I will do in this way until she returns to Leo, where she went retrograde last summer. And then we will sort of call the whole Venus in Leo helping us all have more loving, deserving sense of our emotional bodies, will be complete. So today, in an eclipse that's ruled by Venus, Venus is semi-squaring Pluto, and the sun is semi-squaring Uranus. So I just throw that in there to say that one of the things that's happening as we move through this full moon, crazy amplified couple of days, is that we may be a little bit out of sorts and filled with sudden shifts and changes that are confusing and surprising. That's the sun in a semi-square with Uranus. And I'm pointing that out because Venus is making the same geometry to Pluto. So as we move through this full moon, do not be surprised if there's some actual power struggles in how you approach love and relationship, that this full moon eclipse might actually be sort of taking you through a deep release around same. And if that's rough for you, just sort of wait till Thursday, because on Thursday, Venus will move through a sextile with Uranus. And that's a moment where if we're doing our work, you got to do work to get a sextile to pay a dividend. It's a geometry of potential. Right? If you just sit there and do nothing, you won't enjoy this benefit. But if you're doing some work on your heart this week, when we get to Thursday, there will be kind of an explosion of excitement once again in the relationship area. So for anybody who's working through a dynamic that's a little scary or painful, the full moon eclipse might be a little bumpy, but if you pay attention to what it's trying to teach you, by the time we get through Thursday, there should be some emotional release. Meanwhile, good luck getting through the first half of the wormhole. We'll catch up with you next week's pod to see how you're doing. And meantime, have at it.
Did you know that Michael has a daily astro alert? If you enjoy hearing the weekly astrology, you might like knowing more about each day. When you subscribe for the daily astro alerts, you'll get an in-depth explanation of the day's astrology sent right to your email. Subscriptions are only $10 a month, or you can purchase the yearly subscription at the reduced price of $100. To subscribe, head over to michaellennox.com. All right, it's dream segment time. Every week, Dr. Michael will interpret dreams that are sent in via email or take a live caller. If you would like your dream interpreted on the podcast, you can go ahead and email us at dreams@michaellennox.com. Hopefully your dream will make it onto the show.
This week we have an email and dream from Lauren. And Lauren says, "Hi, Dr. Michael and Zoe. My favorite part of your weekly podcast is the dream interpretation segment.
Yay.
It has really enabled me to take a more analytical approach to my own dreams. Usually I can figure them out pretty well, but this one was so strange and it has me stumped."
Yay. All right. Let's dive in.
Here it goes. In the dream, it was present day, but for some reason, we had to visit my childhood home. I haven't been there in probably 25 years, but I just knew that when I opened the door to my room, everything would be just as I had left it. This specific house, I had lived in about 4 different houses throughout my life, but this specific house always had lots of black widow spiders everywhere. So I cautioned my mom and this other nameless woman that was with us, maybe she was a realtor, about what they might see when they open the closet. Expecting to see spiders or other creepy crawlers, we were shocked when a black, fuzzy critter came bounding out of the closet. We quickly realized it was a dog, a black Scottish terrier, and relief washed over us. We all still were weirded out by the fact that a dog had lived in that closet for so long without being let out, or at the very least, was able to get in and out somewhere. The dog walked right up to me and looked up at me as if it was his mission to find me. When I gave him a good look, I noticed that at the end of his snout, where his nose should be, there was a giant blue human eyeball that almost appeared to be lit up from within.
Wow.
Because my brain couldn't make sense of what I'd seen, I woke up. Hopefully, you can make sense of all of this. I look forward to hearing your take.
Wow. What a dream. With a dream like this, if I inch through it symbol by symbol, I think we're going to get the answer that Lauren wants, right? So we start with that it's in present day. So that counts. Like that means that we're in a consideration of how Lauren is operating right here, right now, but it has to connect to the childhood, the specific years of this childhood home, right? So that's the first thing, Lauren, which, I mean, this had to have been, I think, obvious to you if you've been working with your dreams a lot. It can't be surprising that it's like, yes, honey, it's about that age and all the things that got sort of created in your psyche in the years that you lived in that house, but from a perspective of who are you now related to, patterns that got formed, I'm guessing about 25 years ago, because that's how long you say it's been since you've been in that house. So even the idea that I knew my bedroom would be as I left it, that's interesting to me because the bedroom is the room of self-identity, especially for a child in a home where the bedroom is the place where a child can sort of close the door and have an identity that's separate from the family. The fact that you knew your bedroom would be as you left it means we really are investigating specific stuff that happened back then. If you were here, I would say, what age are we talking about? Right? Then you get to sort of have your investigation that I think this dream is asking you to go through, or that it's reflecting that you are going through, has to do with that age, the age you were.
I wish we knew how old that was for her.
Yeah, me too. It would be fun. It would also be instructive in a way to, there are different things that come up at different ages just developmentally, right? So below 8 means abstract thinking hasn't quite formed, which means we're having a whole different way of incorporating, new consciousness. And then we get past 8, it's a whole different story because abstract thinking is in place. Then it's a completely different story when, adolescence arrives and starts putting some chemicals into the bath, right? So it would be good to know. But Lauren knows you could take that idea, that prompt, and go exploring. So the idea of black widow spiders everywhere is fascinating because spiders are a very high vibe medicine. They represent the power of incredible creativity and patience combined, right? I don't actually think that black widows, do they spin webs? I don't know that they do.
I just know black widows are the scary ones because they can bite you,
that's right. So what we do with black widow is we start with, okay, the medicine in spider is always about patience and trusting your abundance comes to you. And we get that from a spider builds a web, which is this miraculous capacity, skill, talent, ability. And then she climbs to the corner of the web and waits, knowing that her meal is on its way, right? So in that patient waiting for the meal, we have the real medicine of spider, which is that sense of, I patiently await my bounty in abundance because I know it's coming to me. But it's black widow. Means there's poison, there's fear. So now we know we're in some shadow from childhood. And we know it's stuff that's hidden because it's in the closet. Now, I don't think Lauren's homosexual, or she wouldn't have said so, right? So we don't want to go too overtly to what in the closet means. So we have to use the same principle without defining it as this is about sexuality, because I don't think that it is. But it is about things that were hidden or pushed out of view. Closets store things, but they're also like a place where we just shove things that we don't want to have lying around. So they can relate to things that are deliberately hidden. And Lauren knows this. She knows there are demons in the closet that have been waiting patiently for a long time. They're still capable of poisoning her ear, even 25 years later. Do you see the tale I'm telling?
I see that, but then it's a cute little dog.
Well, that's right. The creature bounds out of the closet. So what was being hidden was love.
Whoa.
Dogs represent unconditional love.
Right.
But you see, Lauren has shoved that energy into the closet, saying it's painful or poisonous or difficult, but it's really a loving entity. More accurately, I think what this dream is talking to me about is that when we diminish or depress our pain and anxiety by ignoring it somehow, like shoving it in the closet, we also depress our ability to feel joy.
Huh.
Any limit on the system creates a limit on the system. So if you're limiting how much you're willing to look at the painful stuff that you're shoving into the closet that you think is poisonous and will kill you, then and that's what I call the bottom of the wheel where the shadow is, then we also lose joy at the top of the wheel. So the message is go back 25 years, investigate the wounds that you might have shoved into the closet, because what you're going to gain is this inner sense of love that's unconditional. And then for me, the snout of the dog, which is the dog's most sensitive perception mechanism, contains a human's version of the most potent perception mechanism, the eyes. Back to what I was saying in the astrology portion of the podcast. How you perceive your life colors everything. And in this case, Lauren is noticing that there's an eyeball, a human perception. It's blue, which means it connects to communication, the throat chakra. That there's something about, if she lets this dog out and embraces it, then she gets to see her life, eyeball, differently, more through the lens of love and joy, and less driven by the fear of the spiders you shoved in the closet 25 years ago.
Okay, I wouldn't have gotten that.
Well, but my question then for you, Zoe, is are you in acceptance of where I went? Does it make sense? Does it feel
absolutely.
right?
I think, and I'm curious, like, where Lauren got stumped in her dreams, since she's like actively trying to interpret them. But I think, like, for me, the eyeball on the nose is definitely where I feel like my knowledge stops.
Well,
so that was really interesting.
But let's break it down, right? Like I did. Snout has meaning. It is the dog's perception. Eyes have meaning. They are human perceptions.
Yeah.
So it's about taking on a new perception for sure. And then we add the layers of blue and lit up and dogs as loving. And then we know the quality of perception that Lauren's dream is asking her to take on. Open that closet, trust that the Black Widow spiders are dead, and there's a yummy little dog to play with. And what a perfect dream to lead us into what is ultimately a very healing eclipse wormhole. Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you for listening to Conscious Embodiment, Astrology and Dreams with Dr. Michael Lennox. You can find us on Apple Music, the iHeartRadio app, and anywhere you find your favorite shows. Head on over to michaellenix.com for information on astrology readings, the daily Astro Alert subscription, upcoming classes, and to join the mailing list.